First of all, welcome to the library's second virtual lunch and learn. It's May 7th, 2020. This is 12:30 to 1:30 via WebEx. And as Andrew mentioned, this is being recorded. But I'd like to tell you a little about Ellis Island, and then I'll talk to you about the immigration process as well. Okay, it was named for Samuel Ellis, who was the last private owner of the island. And then from a brief history from about 1630 to 1770, at that point it was little more than a spit of sand in the Hudson River just south of Manhattan Island. The Mohegan Indians who lived on the nearby shores called the island Kiosk or Gull Island. In the 1630s, a Dutchman, Michael Pauw, acquired the island and named it Oyster Island for the plentiful amounts of shellfish on its beaches. And during the 1700s, it was also known as Gibbet Island for its gibbet, or gallows tree, used to hang men convicted of piracy. Now, here we have the 1876 Revolutionary map. And down here, where my cursor is, you can just make out Oyster Island. And all I can think of is that everybody must have had to row out to the tavern that Samuel Ellis had built on the island, and then let's hope they were all sober enough to row back safely. Okay, so his tavern catered to local fishermen. Ellis died in 1794, and in 1808, New York State bought the island from his family for $10,000. In 2019 numbers, that's $161,770.66. Beginning during the War of 1812, the U.S. War Department paid the state for the right to use Ellis Island to build military fortifications and store ammunition. Half a decade later, Ellis Island was used as a munition arsenal for the Union Army during the Civil War. And just for fun, here's a Google image showing the island today. It's along up here, and you can see, at least fortunately these days, there's a bridge, so nobody has to row out to the island anymore. And then just below it is Liberty Island, where the Statue of Liberty is located. Just kind of, you can see how close the two islands were for people coming into the country. Okay, and then here's a photograph of the Statue of Liberty, just because. After this, from 1865 to 1892, after the Civil War, Ellis Island was vacant until the government decided to replace the New York Immigration Station at Castle Garden, which closed in 1890. Control of immigration was turned over to the federal government, and $75,000 was appropriated for construction of the first federal immigration station on Ellis Island. Artisanal wells were dug, and the island's size was doubled to over 6 acres, with landfill created from incoming ships' ballast, as well as the excavation of subway tunnels in New York. So if you want to know where they put all the dirt when they were digging out the subways, up on Ellis Island. So immigration at Ellis Island officially opened January 1, 1892. There were 3 ships waiting to land. 700 immigrants passed through Ellis Island that day, and nearly 450,000 followed over the course of the first year. Over the next 5 decades, more than 12 million people passed through the island on their way into the United States. And the very first arrival, January 1st, 1892, on her 15th birthday, Annie Moore from County Cork, Ireland, became the first person admitted to the new immigration station on Ellis Island. On the opening day, she received a greeting from the officials and a $10 gold piece. That must have been a wonderful thrill for her. She had traveled to New York with her 2 younger brothers on steerage aboard the SS Nevada, which left Queenstown, which is now Cobb, Ireland, on December 20, 1891, and arrived in New York on the evening of December 31st. After they were processed, they were reunited with their parents, who were already living in New York. Now, this is a photograph of Annie taken later on in life after she's married, and I'm assuming that's one of her children. Okay. between 1903 and 1910, to create additional space at Ellis Island, 2 new islands were created using still more landfill. Island 2 housed the hospital administration and contagious diseases ward, while Island 3 held the psychiatric ward. By 1906, Ellis Island had grown to more than 27 acres from an original size of only 3 acres. And this is a current view of the islands, and you can see the bridge connecting it to the mainland. Okay, there was a future mayor who worked there. Fiorello LaGuardia, future mayor of New York City, worked as an interpreter for the Immigration Service at Ellis Island from 1907 to 1910, while he was completing law school at New York University. Born in New York in 1882 to immigrants of Italian and Jewish ancestry, LaGuardia lived for a time in Hungary and worked at the American consulates in Budapest and other cities. From his experience at Ellis Island, LaGuardia came to believe that many of the deportations for so-called mental illness were unjustified, often due to communication problems or to the ignorance of doctors doing the inspections. Here's what would happen when a ship would come in to Ellis Island. Let's say it was a ship with mostly Italian people on it. They would call someone like LaGuardia, who could both read and write English and Italian, and he would be called, and he would be the translator for the person or persons coming ashore. If you were a Greek person on that boat and they forgot to tell the immigration officers, yes, you might have to wait until they found a Greek interpreter to help you through the process. I know there are a lot of stories about people's names being changed at Ellis Island. The Ellis Island authorities very much resent that, and they say, no, we had our interpreters who did that. On the other hand, the minute you came to America, if you wanted to change your name, there was nobody to stop you doing it. Or if when you became a citizen, you wanted to change your name, you could do it then as well. So that just gives you a different view, because so many people have had the story of the name was changed at Ellis Island. That may be true, that may not be true. But I just wanted to let you know how Ellis Island felt about it. Okay, in 1920 through 1935. In 1921, President Warren G. Harding signed the Immigration Quota Act. According to the new law, annual immigration from any country cannot exceed 3% of the total number of U.S. immigrants from that country as recorded in the U.S. Census for 1910. So the immigration process was severely restricted, and a lot of people were not allowed into the country. And Ellis Island stayed open until 1954, when all of the 33 structures were officially closed November 1954. Now, just to let you know, New York was not the only port through which immigrants entered into the country. There was also Boston, Philadelphia, Charleston, Savannah, New Orleans. There were others, Galveston, Texas. So really a lot of places along the coast. And in general, the immigration process, the keeping of records of people coming in basically begins about 1820, but there would be other records that one could consult as well. There's a nice article by Joe Bine, I suppose that's how I pronounce his name, Tips for Determining Your Ancestors' Probable Port for Arriving from 1820 to 1950. This is a nice website. Genealogybranches.com has a lot of good stuff on it, and I will be talking about it in my other series coming up later. That's the next one. All right. Okay, going into the immigration history and process. Actually, when they started out, there was colonial immigration. It wasn't only people from Britain, Scotland, and Ireland that came to North America. There were people from other countries. And so very often you might have to take an oath of allegiance, typo, to the people disembarking on the ship. Most records are preserved in the individual states, which were formerly the colonies. Just as an example of a few of our titles in local history, we have Anderson's The Great Migration Begins, Immigrants to New England, Volume 1 is 1620 to 1633. There were also Palatine families of New York. A lot of Germans from the Palatinate area emigrated, and New York was one of the places they stopped for a while. There's also the Pennsylvania German pioneers, which is a good place if your people wound up in Pennsylvania. Then we have a couple of books, Denizations and Naturalizations in the British Colonies in America, Denizations, Naturalizations, and Oaths of Allegiance in Colonial New York. And then here's a nice one for you, Naturalizations of Foreign Protestants in the American and West Indian Colonies. So these are all books that would deal with people coming to the British colonies. People born here in the British colonies were automatically British citizens. But the people who came who were not British citizens, who might have immigrated, British citizens immigrated, have no problem. Foreigners immigrating do have problems, but they were allowed to become denizens, which sounds like a D&D topic. Denization is an obsolete process in English common law, whereby a foreigner can become a denizen, gaining some privileges of a British subject. They had the right to hold land and through the letters patent, but they didn't have the full rights that British citizens did. But since owning land is one of the most important things you want to be able to do in a country, that was a good thing that they could do that. Denization fell into disuse when statutory mechanisms for naturalization developed. It was not something that the United States used when we became the United States. But there's your trivia word for the day. Okay, this is just a brief excerpt by Eileen Bolger, where she's talking about the first Naturalization Act, which is passed by Congress on March 26, 1770, providing that any free, white, adult alien, male or female, who had lived in the United States for a period of 2 years could become a citizen. All they had to do was apply to any common law court in any one of the states where he shall have resided for the term of 1 year. Citizenship was granted to those who proved to the court's satisfaction that he or she was of good moral character and took an oath of allegiance to the Constitution. Under the system established by the Act, aliens could be naturalized not only in federal courts, but also in state and local courts. And here's an important point. Children of successful applicants, if under 21 years of age, automatically became citizens. So that's an important thing to remember, and I'm going to be talking to that a little bit later. This is just a small excerpt from a much larger essay by her, and it's a great essay if you want to read it. Let's see next. Okay, there are more than a few books in local, but these are kind of a couple I wanted to mention. For example, we have some naturalization records from Kane County, DeKalb County. We have the immigration histories of some of the Rockford Italian families. Those are the first and second editions, edited by Mike Doyle. There's also, for example, immigration of the Irish Quakers into Pennsylvania, 1682 to 1750. And then there's a multi-volume set, Aaron's Sons, Irish Arrivals in Atlantic Canada. Most of the time, a lot of the time, British citizens from England, Ireland, or Scotland might have sailed from the old world to Canada. This is because you're not moving to a foreign country. You're not immigrating to a foreign country. You are merely moving to another part of the British Empire. And that was an easier process. Now, there were a lot of people who settled in Canada for a few years, or maybe more than a few years, and then looked at the country to the south of them and said, oh, we're moving to the United States. And that's what happened to a lot of people too. So if you don't find them on a ship. They might have come in through Canada. And we do have other records talking about people coming into Canada. Canadian archives are a good source too. And the family stories are always good. Okay. This is a little bit more. I mentioned that in 1790, you only had to have lived there 2 years. Then in 1795, you had to file a declaration of intention and residency was changed to 5 years. 1798, I don't know what they were thinking. They said you had to live here 14 years, including 5 years in the state or territory where the court was held. In 1802, they realized, oh, this is a mistake, and the law was changed back to 5 years. So generally speaking, the immigration process from filing your first papers to when you took your final citizenship was normally a 5-year period. Not everybody did it within that time, and there was no compulsion to do it as a general rule. Sometimes the guys got together and said, you know what, let's all go down and do our citizenship thing, and they would vouch for each other. So that was one way to do it too. There were also some changes in 1906. They wanted the birth date and marriage date for women and minor children. In 1922, American-born women who married a foreigner lost their United States nationality. In 31, the law was amended so they didn't lose it solely through marriage. Another thing, homestead records. We've all read about the homesteading, indicated that both American citizens and those who had filed a declaration of intent were eligible to own homestead lands. And since you usually worked the homestead for at least 5 years before it became your own, you might work the homestead and do the, excuse me, and get your citizenship about the same time. Excuse me. After 1862, 21 years of older who were honorably discharged from military could petition for citizenship with 1 year's residency. They didn't automatically become citizens just because of military service. You did have to apply. But in 1918, that was amended so you could. And many people were naturalized at military posts, nearby courts, rather than their legal residence. So it might be something like, excuse me, the sergeant says, Kowalski, you're not yet a citizen. Come on, we're going down to the courthouse next to the camp here, and we're going to make you a citizen. So it might be something as simple as that. So if you don't find your ancestors' records in the county where he lived most of his life, he did serve in the military, it's worth checking the court records near his camp, and just in case they're there instead. But you can find the records almost anywhere. There might be a copy at home. The census records, we'll talk about it, and we'll go to that one later. Their military records might talk about it. Cemetery records, tombstones, anytime. And before 1906, you could go anywhere there was a court at any level to apply for and get your citizenship. Some of the older naturalization records have been moved to regional offices of the National Archives. For example, this is examples of some of the records for Illinois that are housed at the National Archives Regional Office on Pulaski Road in Chicago. If you ever go into there, first of all, look at their website, see when they're back open again. Check with them. Most of the time you used to have to register for a microfilm machine because so many of their records were on microfilm. It's worth checking to find out if that's still the case, or if you just, in any case, it's always best to phone ahead and see what's going on. This is an example of the National Archives facilities. Of course, there's the National Archives in Washington, D.C., which is the main building. But then, as you can see throughout the country's been divided up into different regions, and that's where you would go. So, for example, for the one in Chicago, it covers records from Wisconsin, Minnesota, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, and Michigan. So if you're doing research for people in those areas, this is another good place to go. And here is the Chicago National Archives website. It shows hours, but I know over here on the right where it says what's new, they're not going to be open these days. But you can contact them and plan your visit and things like that. And a lot of things are just up in the air right now, so we'll just have to wait and see. Okay. All right. Generally, it was a two-step process that took a minimum of 5 years. After residing in the U.S. for 2 years, you could file your declaration of intent, which is sometimes called first papers. Some of the sources say that the first papers will also include the town or village from where your people immigrated, if you don't already know that. So it is worthwhile trying to find first papers. And then when you get your actual citizenship papers, all it is going to say is that you're pledging your loyalty to the United States of America and you're abjuring any allegiance to whether it's the King of Prussia or the King of England or wherever. It doesn't tell you where you're from beyond the fact that, well, if your allegiance had been to the King of Prussia and it isn't anymore, obviously you came from Prussia. So those are things to do. And as we said before, up until 1906, any court of record could grant citizenship. Having said that, even though the federal courts took over, it was many years before the courts stopped issuing citizenship. Just to let you know, the Rockford Public Library has 4 reels of microfilm, which lists the names of individuals who became citizens in Winnebago County. These records were filmed in the year 2000. They list the book, page, and date. The records are supposed to be at the records office in the Winnebago County Courthouse on the east end of the first floor. If they don't have all of them anymore, the rest of them should be at the National Archives in Chicago on Pulaski Avenue, as we talked about. However, Ancestry and Family Search have also been adding certificates, and so sometimes you can find them there as well. This is an example from our file. This is a nice typed one. Some of the handwritten ones are kind of faded and difficult to really read. This is a guy, Hans Ock, who was from New Haven, Connecticut, but he was at Camp Grant, and he was not yet a citizen. He's 23. So probably his sergeant said to him, hey, Hans, let's get this done. So they went down and he got his certificate January 21st, 1944 at the circuit court here in Rockford. So this is the index sheet. And then if someone wanted to look up the full length form, they'd have to go over to the courthouse. But it's just kind of fun to see that one. Now, this is a different area and we're going to get a little bit of combination things here. This is Petrus August Mersoni, who was living in Geneseo, and he became a citizen again at the circuit court in Henry County on November 4th, 1937. He and his family came to America in 1920, just to let you know. This is his wife, Mary Leontine Mersoni, and she gets hers the same day, November 4, 1937, because it's after the time period when wives automatically became citizens when their husband did. So she had to get her own. This is their eldest son, Morris, and it's a Flemish name, so you say Morris, not the French pronunciation of Maurice. Now, he doesn't become a citizen until June 6th, 1940. And that is because he was already 21 when his parents became citizens in November of 37. He was born in March of 16. So he was definitely over age. They'll go back to that a little later. To let you know, the 1900 through 1940 census records show whether or not a person was naturalized. And they include a lot of good information. That includes abbreviations, A for alien, N for naturalized, NR, not reported, PA, first papers filed, i.e. declaration of an intent. AM for citizen, American citizen born abroad. That was used in the 1940 census to indicate the citizenship status of people. Some of the earlier censuses also included the year that they came, so that's good to know. Okay, now what happens here in the 1940 census, August and Mary, okay, August and Mary, over second column from the right, says NA for both August and Mary. For Morris, it says PA. Now, the next son, okay, Morris, Joseph, and Camille were all born in Belgium. Joe is not in the 40 census here because he's off in the Navy and he ought to show up somewhere else, but I haven't yet found him. But I know since he was born in 17, he was younger. He was not yet 21. So he, like Camille, if you go over to Camille's, you'll see the NA for naturalized. So Joe and Camille would have been naturalized under their father's citizenship, whereas Morris had to get his own citizenship, which he did a little bit later. So you wouldn't expect to find stuff about naturalization on census records, but guess what? There it is, just to let you know. Okay, and as I said before, you can find them almost anywhere. Start with your local courthouses, your regional depositories, military camps, your family Bibles. Maybe they're in a drawer somewhere for all we know. And both Ancestry and Family Search have been doing some material about adding things like that. And okay, Ellis Island is another good place. A lot of people come in through Ellis Island. And you can, without doing anything, you can go in and look up a name and see if they show up. Watch the spelling. They managed to misspell Mersoni and the first names of all of them when they came in 1920, but that's another story. If you want to go further, after you find them listed and the date matches what you know, you do have to at least register with like your email and make up a new password. You can also purchase forms and things like that. I think they're a little expensive myself, but it's up to you. And Ellis Island has just started doing something new. My coworker told me about it yesterday. If you make a $30 donation to the Ellis Island Foundation and then send them an email, they will be happy to do research for you if you're running into problems and things like that. So it's sort of a free search after you've made your donation, just to let you know that that is an option. It is a good website. It's fun to look for people. I would suggest definitely using it. And in any database, see how far you can go for free before you have to pay. And then there are some organizations, some databases, you could get a free trial. And, you know, for like a week or something like that. Ancestry sometimes has free weekends, like Memorial Day and Labor Day weekend. And you can look at some of their databases there. With any of the databases, before you put down the money, I would check it out. You can always sign up for almost any of the newsletters free of charge, and they will be happy to post you and tell you what's going on, hoping that you might join them at some point. Again, if you do try the free trial, you have to cancel before they bill you, just to let you know, or put it on your birthday list. Here's an example. This is when the Mersonis came in on the ship, the Lapland. They arrived at New York January 15 of 1920. This is a stitch. Okay, this column 16 here, by whom was passage paid? So down here on line 20, is it 20? Line 20, where it says myself, where is the person headed? He's headed to his brother-in-law's, Camille Van Holderbeck in Geneseo, Illinois. And August was 5'8", fair, had brown hair and gray eyes, was born in Slating. Then the second line, she's going to her brother because the Van Holderbecks had said they would sponsor them. Mary Leontine was 5'1", also fair with brown hair and blue eyes. And then paid by father, the next three lines are the three boys, Morris, Joseph, and Camille. And obviously the person keeping the records didn't care because they were kids, and kids were counted, but not necessarily given a description. Okay. These are a few of the sources I used. There's a lot of fun information out there. I hope I have tried to answer some of your questions about what's going on. And I will be opening it for questions in a minute. I just want to remind you that next Thursday at this time, 12:30, Kathy Kressel will be talking about the dark side of Rockford, prohibition. And so if you're ever curious about some of the darker sides of Rockford's under history, this might be a good time to learn about it. And there will be additional lunch and learn classes coming up. The week after that, I'm doing genealogy from home without a library card. And the week after that, genealogy from home with a library card. I'd like to thank everybody for coming. Andrew, would you like to open things up for questions?
Absolutely. So if you have a question for Jean, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask away.
I don't have a question, but I would just like to say thank you to the library and thank you very, very much to Jean Lithgow for this presentation today. It's very informative and I truly appreciate it and look forward to the future sessions.
Oh, thank you, Joyce. It's good to hear your voice.
Very welcome. I didn't know you recognized it.
Yes, I did. Have I scared everyone away from doing immigration research? Joyce, can I talk to them about the time you and I were researching some of the Acadians up in Canada and what happened to them? Do you remember that? You're on mute. Okay, I got it. There. Okay, thanks. Yeah, Joyce was researching the Acadians when the British defeated the French, they threw the Acadians out, and we were trying to find a land route. And we finally found out that there was not a land route, but most of them, they were either sent back to France, or some of them were sent down the coast to Boston, Philadelphia, other cities, or all the way down to New Orleans, where many of them settled in Louisiana and became known as Cajuns. So that's another way people immigrated. Thanks for jogging my memory.
I want to say too, Jean, thanks for all that you have done and in the history room. I miss being in the history room.
Well, we'll be back someday. I just have no idea when. The question about can you find records on people being deported? They are starting to show up, and there probably are some at Ancestry. You could also check newspaper accounts of that time, and there's probably court records as well. Is there another question? Oh, thank you, Joanne. There are some books about Swedish immigration to Rockford. A lot of them are in the general history books, and some of them are in biographies and things like that. And if you go to the Rockford newspapers, you can go to Newsbank through the library's website using your Rockford Public Library card. They would list articles in the newspaper, and there'd be a whole list of people who would become citizens at the same time. So you could look for your ancestor's name there and see if you can find out exactly when it occurred. It's kind of like even today, on the 4th of July, they'll have new people take their citizenship oath at that point, and then the newspaper will usually do a nice article and have a photograph of the people becoming citizens at that point. So yes, there's certainly the court records. You could come in and look at our indexes when we are open again, or you could email me about that. But yes, there's usually ways to pin it down. Does that answer the question? Well, you always start with yourself, and you start by recording like your birth, baptism, confirmation, bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah, whatever, schooling, jobs, things like that. You do that for yourself. If you're married, you do that for your spouse. You do it for all your siblings. You do it for your parents, and you start branching out, collecting the information you already know and keeping track of the oral tradition, which is so lovely. It's all those great family stories. And then you can start searching for them. And there's city directories, there's indexes, there's census records.
I love how they have a golf cart to take you around.
Say that again. I didn't quite hear. So yeah, so if you just want to email me and you have like, you know, a general or specific question, I'll certainly do my best to answer it. It's down there at the bottom of the screen, jlithgow@rockfordpubliclibrary.org. Or if you phone us, we are taking telephone questions that, you know, eventually get through. So that's good. Any other questions at this time? Well, then I think what I will do is thank you all very much for joining us today. It's always a lot of fun, and I'm happy to talk about the topics. I have a lot of fun doing that. I just want to remind you, next week, same time, Thursday, May 14th, 12:30 to 1:30, Kathy Kressel will be talking about Rockford's Dark Days Prohibition. Just sign up for her class the same way that you signed up for this one. If you want to do some genealogy work in 2 weeks, as I said, I'll be doing for genealogy without a library card, and the week after genealogy with a library card. So I'll be happy to, I'll hope you join us, or if you know some people that think they might want to do their genealogy while they're kind of stuck at home, this is a way to begin. Thank you, everyone. Okay, thank you, Amber. Good to hear you. So,
Thank you.
okay, thanks, Deborah. Andrew, it's all yours.
Alrighty, with that, thank you, everyone, and we will now conclude the meeting. Thank you.